Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of Talking Point. My name is Chelsea Sikora. I'm the creative director for the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce, coming to you from the Wynn Technology Studio, and we want to thank our media sponsor, Royal Credit Union. In today's episode, we will be examining city budgets and their effects on local businesses. And to host the episode, we have Chamber President and CEO, Dave Miner, alongside Vice President of Governmental Affairs, Scott Rogers, with our guest today being Eau Claire City Manager, Stephanie Hirsch. Dave, take it away.
So as we start our conversation here today on this episode of Talking Point, I want to welcome City Manager Stephanie Hirsch, and we have Scott Rogers here, Vice President of Government Affairs. My point or hope, no pun intended, somewhere in there, I'll let you work that one out. Really, my hope of doing this one is to get people to understand, Stephanie, the complexity in creating a city budget. As we were talking, getting set up here, I think so many people think, well, the city budget is huge. I hear this big number. Why is it so hard to get things done? But they don't realize how columnized or segregated, whatever form you want to use, there are specific things that can be done with certain dollars and others you can't. But they think of the city budget as their own budget. It's one checkbook. And when it comes to government, we're so far from that. So today is just hopefully having a conversation about how the budget is put together, all the different variations, and getting people hopefully to have a better understanding of how that happens. And Scott, I'll turn over to you to kind of maybe loft up the first question, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, we'll probably start out with just what is a city budget, and we're recording this shortly after the city finished its budget this year. So you're listening to this probably in late November. Stephanie, tell us a little bit about just what is the city budget and what does it entail?
Thank you for the question. Thanks for having me here. The budget was just passed by the council last night at their meeting, and it was a big relief for us to have that taken care of. It's a lot of work to put it together, and we really just, as soon as that budget is passed, then we move on to starting to work on the 2026 budget. So it's really a year-long process. Because of financial constraints in Wisconsin for all municipalities, there is very few ways that we can generate revenue, and this has been true for the last 30 years at least. And so prior managers before me have looked for every possible solution to try to balance the budget, and they identified some efficiencies, and any efficiency that they identified, they implemented. And so now us inheriting the fiscal picture, we have to look even harder for those opportunities to either generate more revenue or to save. And so it's been just a daily process to talk through any possible option and to see if it's promising at all. So the budget document captures how we're going to spend our money in the coming fiscal year. And in Wisconsin, the fiscal years, or in Eau Claire, the fiscal year is the same as the calendar year. And it's mostly salaries, because most of what we do is salaries. There's also a capital budget, which is longer-term infrastructure. We also spend a lot on debt because our borrowing funds the capital infrastructure. And because of the way the state tax law works, it kind of incentivizes borrowing because the borrowing is above our levy limit, which I can explain also. So the budget document is our plan and our commitment to spending monies in the coming year, and it also is supposed to and does reflect our values and priorities. The main thing about budgets in this environment is that there's very little money to spend, so that every year there's not much more to spend, so there's really not many decisions to make, and so in a way that makes the process go much faster because there very little changes from year to year. But then on the other hand, it makes it kind of an ongoing process because we continue to keep looking for those ways to add positions or to address new needs that are emerging. But just if you look at the budget document year to year, it's very, very similar because it's just more about where do you cut or where do you pare off versus some communities that do have ways to grow their revenue along with population growth or along with CPI, and they're trying to decide where to spend that additional money that comes in. But we don't unfortunately have that luxury. We're more trying to triage and say which issue is the very top of our minds this year, or the biggest worry, and spend it on that, and then move on to the next year and try to figure out what can we do next.
Before we get in much deeper, maybe just sort of a big picture. You mentioned two budgets. So there's a capital budget and an operating budget. The operating budget is the most recent one done. The capital had already been done. Sort of how big are they? And then you mentioned that we have to make some choices, but some things are the most important. So where does the money come from, and what are the biggest things we spend it on?
Right. Good question. So it's actually, maybe you can think of it more as three different buckets of budgets. So our capital improvement budget was $51 million for 2025, and that's the spending on infrastructure. So items that have long-term value, that could be bridges or parking garages or fire trucks. And that's paid for largely through debt. There is some funding that comes from the general fund, and could be grants or aid from the federal government, the state government. So that's one big bucket, and it's we reviewed that first in the budget process because it kind of flows into the general fund. And Dave Solberg and Leah Ness are really key in putting that together, and Lane Berg, these are people who work related. Their departments relate to infrastructure. So Leah Ness is our engineering director. Dave Solberg is the deputy city manager, but has a long history in working in engineering and on development. And then Lane Berg is our community services director. So that's like all of the plows and the water utility vehicles and those kinds of things. Then another big bucket is our general fund, and that comes through the taxes, which about half of it is funded by property taxes. And then there's also like fees and fines, and that would pay for salaries of our police department, our fire department, recreation, my salary, the finance department, all of those areas. And then a third bucket, which is multiple different funds, is our enterprise funds. And those are ones that kind of function more like a business, where ideally they have a revenue source that pays for the work that they do. Some of those we also subsidize. So like we subsidize transit, we subsidize Fairfax, which is an enterprise fund, Hobbs, which is an enterprise fund. But some are totally self-reliant, and that's mainly our water, sewer utilities. And that's a real blessing in Wisconsin, because they are able to invoice people, customers, to pay for water and sewer without having to be tied up in the very many laws that relate to revenue restrictions. So it's really those three buckets.
And how big is the operating budget?
Yeah, so the general fund is $96 million. Some of that is not real dollars. It's just it's an accounting. About $6 million of it is more just an accounting line, but it's basically $90 million that we can actually spend on goods and services and salaries. And then enterprise funds total $45 million. Special revenue totals $23.7 million. Debt service is $13 million. Internal service funds is $10 million. So that's a total of $190 million. But just to note, some of those are transfers between departments, so that it's basically the funding is double counted. So if you just look at how many dollars are actually spent by the city, it's less than that. And then some of that also funds the CIP. So they kind of are all, this is where it gets very complicated, but they're all kind of connected.
Again, let's talk a little bit about, one of the things I've looked at in 35 years in the chamber world, I don't think communities truly have been engaged in understanding the budget. And I know that this year, and I applaud both you and Emily for going out, holding some town hall meetings, let's call them, to try and explain what the budget is and what people have choices. Because I've always said, I think if you asked anybody, fire, police, fire are always going to come out on the top. And probably most communities say those are, they're it. But then what comes after that? What did you hear when you and Emily took your budget on the road and your community hearings? What are you hearing from the community? What's important to them? What do they want to see?
So I would say that in general, people in Eau Claire, this is my experience, is that people in Eau Claire love the city of Eau Claire, and they have a tremendous trust in Eau Claire city government. And it's because of decades of good management, and not just good management by the city, but really major involvement by groups like the chamber, by churches, by social clubs. It's like it's on everybody's list to volunteer. And you could look at something like Pablo, which is really an infrastructure project, and all these people donated to build Pablo. There's so many places where that would never happen. So people are really invested in Eau Claire. And to me, that means that they generally trust and believe in what we're doing. So they don't come out of the gate really critical of the city. And I think that that's really to the credit of you guys and so many other people like you and the people before us who just kept like investing in the foundation of Eau Claire to really prop it up and build it up. So, in general, we have really high satisfaction among residents. When you get to what to do about the gap, and, like our employees similarly take so much pride in their work and they do such a great job. I just can't say enough about how extraordinary our employees are. They're so good at so many different things. Like our fire department just got its insurance rating, and it was in the top, like I'd have to look at the number, but it's like top 10, 15% nationwide of all fire departments. Our police, I've been around a lot of police departments, and I would say that our police department is the very best run of any police department I've ever seen. So and our parks, people love our parks. Our streets, even though people kind of critique the streets, there's still so much more, the public is so much more satisfied with our streets than they are in other communities. So we've done a really great job of making it look easy, I guess, and continuing to deliver those services. And kind of where we start needing to have that public engagement is what to do next. Like if we just can't keep finding that solution about how to find the next piece of revenue to keep us afloat, how do we make those hard decisions? And I think that's really where we need that engagement. So just for example, in the district discussions, we talked about parks and open space as a trade-off. So we have, in the last 28 years, our parks staff has decreased, and the amount of acres that parkland that we have has significantly increased. And not just that, but our open spaces have become more complex and more cool. So you have, whether it be Haymarket or Phoenix Park, our brand new cannery is so neat, but it's pretty complicated park. It's not just that old, standard playground equipment. So the maintenance needs kind of keep growing. And in fact, the number of acres maintained per staff person has doubled in the last 28 years. So what can we do given that we don't have a way to add parks staff? Mm-hmm. And one thing we've talked about is trying to eliminate shrink our parks portfolio. And, by the way, when we did our resident survey, parks and open space is the very number one thing on everybody's list of why they love Eau Claire. So we know that we want to maintain that priority of parks, but we do think that we have a very big portfolio now, and what we can think about what makes parks so special. We know that parks are cool because they're gathering places. So actually having more people per acre in a park could be a good metric rather than more acres per person.
Sure. Yeah. Because
it's like sometimes you go to a park because you don't want to be alone. You want to be people watching or dog watching or whatever. Amenities in parks is really great. So having the new cool amenities and also maintaining our older amenities like our historic bandshell and Kirsten Park, that's really important that they be safe. Proximity to neighborhoods. So if we build more multifamily housing that is accessible to families with children, then it means they don't have a yard. But if they're right next to the cannery playground, or if we can take away some land that's currently parkland, but still leave some parkland and invest in the amenities and the maintenance of those amenities in the space that's left over, and then have like a accessible housing right next to that parkland. Trust me, that's the coolest thing for a kid. You don't need to be in the backyard when you can find a friend in the playground that's right next to your house that parents don't have to maintain. That's a perfect solution. So we're looking for those kind of like win-win solutions. And that's what we really want to ask people. Like, will you be okay if we let go of this park to invest more in this park?
Sure.
And a really neat, one of our kind of unicorn ideas this year was using ARPA funding to put out an RFP to convert a significant portion of our open space land to pollinator spaces, which reduces the mowing obligation for our streets and our parks division. And it also achieves a council goal of having more pollen like habitat pollinator habitats that promotes our environmental goals. So that was like perfect, right?
Okay.
But that's a hard one to find.
Sure.
So some of the good news we've had in our community is our population growth and our construction and so forth. We have seen statistics that we leapfrogged to 7th place in the state. We're the second fastest growing community in the state behind Madison. We've had the highest net new construction as that's measured. So what are the good parts and challenges that brings for the city when it comes to budgeting?
Yeah, that's definitely super exciting that we are growing quickly. And of course, compared to some places, we're growing more, like even the fastest growing place in Wisconsin is more slow growing than some places in Texas. So you kind of want to say, like, do you guys know how amazing Eau Claire is? And the seasons and the views and the housing, so like I wish we could have even more people. But it doesn't surprise me at all that Eau Claire is fast growing because it is just such a fantastic place to live. And people keep emphasizing how it's easy. You can be downtown for dinner or a Pablo show and then fishing like out in the wilderness, and within 10 minutes. The challenge with growth, and you can see this with Altoona too. So Altoona has been super rapidly growing. Is that the way the budget works is that we can increase our budget by net new construction, which is how much growth you had the prior year, which kind of makes sense. But when you have growth, that means your demands increase as well. So you have more people to serve. And if you are in a period of inflation, which there's always some kind of inflation, you can only increase your budget by how much you grew, not how much you grew plus CPI. So most states would have a levy formula that says you can increase by how much you grew plus CPI. Otherwise, you're like a place like Ashland, Wisconsin, where my mom's from, if it's like 0.5 net new construction, but the CPI was 8%, then they functionally have to cut their budget by 7.5%. So that's the real problem. And then you see it in Altoona. So they're trying to go from a community that's kind of a small town to it's getting to be a real kind of medium-sized city. And they have to start making those big investments, and whether it be in a professional fire department, in wastewater treatment plant, or they have to kind of make those decisions. And they don't have a really easy way to make that adjustment, especially during a period of high inflation. So that's the challenge.
As you're looking down the road, as any business would, as we do and everything, the next 2 to 3, 4, 5 years for the city, what do you see as big items? I mean, two that I can think of right now that, people are talking about: parking garages, things like that.
Oh, yeah.
What are you identifying of, again, what's coming at us? Because, again, I think everybody would agree that you have to look at today, what are we doing? But what's coming at us that is going to impact part of, whether it be the construction budget or CPI or whatever. What are those projects you're looking at within the city that you're saying we're going to need to address, and we don't necessarily have the full answer yet?
Parking garages is definitely on the list, but we are trying to be really smart about parking and look at maybe not replacing the parking garages exactly as is, but trying to optimize every parking space that exists, even if it's on a private lot. And part of that comes through kind of trying to monetize parking. I'm hopeful that we might be able to work with like CVTC, UWEC, Mayo, and private lot holders to figure out, almost like it functions as one parking authority, where you could park in any of those spaces. There'd be a different price depending on what they wanted to set it at, but it'd just be one app or one mechanism to reserve it. So I think so we don't necessarily have to build those big garages, but we do have to do some kind of parking replacement. We really need a new fire station to replace the fire station that's at City Hall. We need a police training facility, a police and fire training facility. Housing, of course, is a big priority, but I think for that housing, it's going to have to be trying to figure out a way to reinvest in the the older housing stock that's in the greater downtown area. That's a lot of really sweet single families that are almost 100 years old that are kind of deteriorating, but would make perfect homes for a family or senior or whoever. So that's a kind of a bigger picture. I hope that the state will change its revenue formula. I'm really excited. This is my vision for where Wisconsin could be in 5 years. I think that Wisconsin, like Eau Claire and Wisconsin, but especially Eau Claire, is going to see that growth of residents. And I think it's going to continue to diversify, which will make us more cosmopolitan and kind of lively. I think we're going to, due to Scott's efforts, we're going to have a commuter train that goes to the cities. So we will be part of the greater metropolitan cities area. And you will have people living in new lofts out of the former Banbury place and hopping on the train and going to work 3 days a week in Minneapolis and vice versa. I am really excited about the work that we're doing right now to think about tourism and marketing of the city, and trying to make sure that we align the tourism dollars to best brand our whole region, and make sure that everything we do adds up to maximizing how many people come to the Eau Claire and how much they enjoy being here, and also how much our residents also enjoy being here. But I think there's a lot of promise in that, because I think Eau Claire really is just such a great place to be and to visit. So I think that'll be really, a promising venture for us. I would love it. My goal is to have every household in, this is just mine, nobody else has signed off on this, but to have every household in the United States, if you say, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, they say, oh yeah, that's the city of bridges and trails and waterways, and I want to have it so that you can have little docks at different parts of the rivers, and then a boat taxi that takes you lets you off at the little docks, and you can go up and have a drink at one place, an appetizer at the next, and a lunch at the next. And I'm hoping that we could brand every bridge. So like right now, the bridges don't all have clear names. And so like one bridge is just covered with flowers. Another bridge has little igloos where you can sit and have dinner. But I don't know. I just think there's a lot of amazing things we could do with all of our waterfront property here in the city.
So you're painting an exciting picture, and I have a mundane question to ask, and that is, you've made some references to things like levy limits and net new construction and what Madison allows the city to do. So kind of pull that together for us. So what are the constraints the city has based on either what the state is sharing or what the state allows the city to do, and what are some of the potential things that might happen in the next budget cycle if you had your druthers?
Yeah, so Wisconsin, I don't know exactly the history, and probably you guys do, but our legislature has blocked every possible idea people have had about how to better fund municipalities. And don't think it's a partisan issue, because you look at the neighboring states who are of all different political makeups, and they do not have this problem. So maybe it has to do with gridlock, or I don't know what, but we have a problem that the laws that govern what we can do as communities have just constrained. So we would really love to see an optional sales tax, a very small amount that would allow us to take some of the burden off of our property taxpayers and shift it to our many visitors who come to the community for things like the trails, the streets, the parks, ambulance service. Those visitors use those as well, and we really need to have a way to help pay for those. A second thing is the shared revenue, as you mentioned. We would like to have more shared revenue. Eau Claire actually gets, because of the formula, which is very complicated and nobody even quite remembers why it was made this way decades ago, but Eau Claire gets less than comparable communities in terms of the total dollar of shared revenue. And then there's lots of other types of techniques that different municipalities have used, but that are blocked off to us. And we would like it if the legislature and the governor would try to figure out how to have some of those happen. Some things that we're hoping for in the near term is the ability to create fire and EMS districts that would allow. Right now, Eau Claire provides ambulance service for, I think it's like 450 square miles area, which is just remarkable. And we would like there to be a way to, there's legislation being considered that would allow us to have a consolidated EMS that's above the levy limits. Regional transit would be fantastic so that we can connect our transit to Chippewa, to Menominee, to Halley, and have a funding mechanism that allows everybody to help pay for that so that we have those connections. So there's a few that are kind of queued up, but big picture, a local sales tax, shared revenue. I would say levy limit reform, like having growth plus CPI, and I do think that's fair. But I don't think we should try to, I don't think that should be the only solution, because our property taxpayers are currently footing the bill for pretty much everything. So I wouldn't put that one first.
So how does the business community, how do we support you? How do we as a business community, I mean, one of the things that I've always is tried to engage with a mayor or city councilor or council president, whatever. We always hear residents, this is how, the tax is on you. But, and I'm not suggesting you or the city council here have done this, but there's not always a lot of talk at times of what is the business community paying the taxes and what is that percentage of an overall. So how do we as a business organization help support some of those needs that you just listed off, yet how does that impact us at the same time? How could we help you in a way?
Well, the business community is already very, I think, supportive and active, and it's it has a lot to do with you and all the different leaders who have been so active, like on our boards and commissions and like EDC and that kind of thing. So I would just say continue that. And I think to be curious about like Eau Claire, certainly how healthy Eau Claire is as a city government is important it's kind of an anchor for the whole community. So if we're really struggling, then everybody is going to eventually struggle. So just to stay curious about our problems and the opportunities. And I think the business community already does that. So yeah, like right now, one thing we're thinking about is our local transit and how we can make it every dollar that we invest in transit have a big payoff in terms of people getting where they need to go. And we can't really expand it because we don't have any money, but we really would like to expand it so that it serves more, like by implementing microtransit or by getting out to the west side to Menards or CVTC. So that's one where we have to somehow figure out if they're business partners who would find it a benefit to have their employees able to take transit to get back and forth to work. So that's something we're kind of thinking about right now. And interestingly enough, that surprised me, but the reliance on cars has significantly increased in recent years. You'd think it would kind of decrease because they're so expensive and so people care about like sustainability and stuff, but it's the opposite. Our households are becoming more car dependent. So what can we do to reverse that? I think that's one where if we have business partners who can help us think about that, both from like how can they help their employees thrive and also using their business minds to think about like how do we make the balance of budget here.
One of the things, I mean, we've touched on this a little bit, but coming at it maybe from a little bit different angle and broaden it, one of the avenues that your budget is constrained to is that net new growth that you can add. So from a city standpoint, and Aaron White is very involved and done a great job, with the economic development. But what is the city looking at when it talks economic development? What are the areas you're hoping to see grow to continue that net new growth? Because new businesses come here. Aaron has been talking about that. A couple of our industrial parks are getting to the point of being full, which is great. But I don't think enough. I don't think there's people think about this enough that when there's a new business, that does mean new employees, new homes, everything did. So, but from an economic development standpoint, what are you, the city council, maybe looking at? What do we want here?
That's a big question. Economic development, this growth is paramount. It's like definitely one of the top things on our list. No matter what else we have to do, it's that.
Okay.
And it's, I think, a lot of different things. So you mentioned the industrial parks. We're looking for additional land right now, but our boundaries we're kind of being we are limited in which areas we can grow. So like with the town of Washington incorporation, that would limit that boundary if that moves forward. And so that's kind of a challenge. We don't necessarily know how we have to be able to find that land.
Right.
And if we become landlocked, then like happens in some communities, that means like no growth. And there are certainly some like that in the state right now. So monitoring our boundaries and those agreements is a key part of that, like growing out. Then there's also growth within the city. So like we looked at the Oakwood Mall, we want to get ahead of that and to make sure that it doesn't decline anymore.
Correct.
Without trying to play a part in that. There's certainly economic development within our, like in closer to downtown and stuff like that. There's different types of, it might not lead to, like an amazing downtown has led to net new construction in terms of higher density residential downtown, like where Scott lives. So that's complementary too. And then quality of life is really important for attracting businesses. The council is also interested in trying to be thoughtful about or strategic in economic development so that we attract businesses that we really think make Eau Claire better. So like, I don't know the exact term, but it's like agro, maybe you guys know, but it's basically technology related to food and farming. So it's like creating artificial meats or fermented products. And then I think, and I'm just the wrong person to talk about this, but that's a whole ecosystem of industries.
Sure.
So you could have one group's waste as another group's like
Yep.
ingredient.
Oh, yeah. No.
So that's the kind of thing that would be good for sustainability. It'd have higher paying jobs, perhaps. It has not toxic effluent. So that might be the kind of thing. It might complement something CVTC is doing and the university is doing.
Sure.
So that would be like a great path. And the council would like to kind of guide it that way. On the other hand, maybe we just want ones that bring in a ton of net new construction dollars and tax dollars. So like, and there's some like that too.
Sure.
Swing it back to the budget a little bit, but really a two-part question. So you have made references to things like the council. And one of the first things that comes up when somebody moves to town or I'm talking to a colleague in another community, it's like, you don't have a mayor. So how does that work in Eau Claire? First of all, how does it work in terms of you're the city manager, we have a city council and a city council president, Emily Berge. How do you work together to get things decided and done for the city? And then secondly, maybe on a broader scale, one of the things that we are proud of in our community is that we have a collaborative atmosphere, that we want people to be able to work together across different organizations, et cetera. So first of all, how does the city management and the council work together making decisions like the budget? And then maybe comment on the overall collaborative spirit or atmosphere we try to maintain in Eau Claire.
So the city manager form of government, I try to, it's really challenging because it's basically like I have to supervise about 10 to 18 people and then I'm supervised by 11 people. So it's just the amount of relationship management it's a lot. I think we have a really, really great council who's like curious, smart, have big hearts, respectful. So it's easy to work with them. How do you make decisions? I think, and I came from a strong mayor form of government, so I can see pros and cons of the different forms. But it's just like a lot of talking and thinking and trying to understand what each person wants and then try to help deliver on their goals. And that part is, it's more, the city manager form of government is more cautious. It's more incremental change. And which can be good or not good, but you really have to get a lot of consensus before you can take any steps. And it's also the department heads also have really strong roles in a city management form of government because they're the ones who have the longevity. So they might have been there for 20 years, and they're the ones that have the continuity across different city managers and different council members. But I mean, I love our department heads and I love our council, and so I think it's a good group right now. There's no like, issues that I'm aware of. And in terms of the Eau Claire way or whatever it's called, of like the spirit of collaboration, I think we are in sort of a challenging time now because of the fiscal constraints, and And so I think that we are all not just the city, but also the county and Altoona and the other organizations are kind of like really looking at the partnership. So they're something that might have been easy 30 years ago or 20 years ago to come to an agreement on. It was like a handshake agreement. Is harder now that there is we're worrying about every single penny. And so I think we have to, as a city, make sure that all of the agreements we're in, whether it be with municipal partners or like the Visit Eau Claire that we're looking at right now, that they really are true to the council's vision of how to help our residents and our businesses and our environment in the city. And so we are really scrutinizing those. And I think in some cases it will be a reset. But I think that the after there's a reset and that all parties feel that the terms are fair, then that will allow us to kind of move on into new partnerships that are based on a kind of like stronger footing than the handshake agreements that we might have had 20 years ago. So I think it's just kind of the nature of a transition time and a very resource constrained, but I think we'll be in really good shape so that if there are some reforms to the tax policy in Wisconsin, then we will be really ready to go. But I'm super proud of how much work we in the city have done to understand we spend so much time understanding every aspect in a deep, deep way of all of our operations. And so that we know we can map out like 2 months, 2 years, 2 decades and have those visions and be ready to go. I feel that we really have things in order. And people like Kitsy Winters, it's just like she literally is never not thinking about funding. Like she'll all night and all day. She's on vacation. She's sending messages. So we're trying to get at the root and be super smart about everything we do and still stay true to our values and put our residents and businesses first and do our very best to take care of people and keep Eau Claire amazing, not break Eau Claire at minimum and take it to that next phase as well. So it's been a challenging process, but also, interesting. It's not boring.
So what do you see as our greatest challenge, opportunity, as you look 5-10 years down the road? Like if we don't deal with X, the rest of this isn't going to work, So what is that opportunity you think as a community we need to maybe, if they don't see it, to understand what it may be, but because where I'm coming from, this, Stephanie, is I think so many times people look to the city and say, that's a city problem, so we're going to look to you. You have to solve it. And then we tend to walk away.
Yeah.
And so what do you see as a whether you want to call it a problem, and I look at them as opportunities or whatever, that as a community we need to address to make sure we as a community succeed?
I think the fiscal stability is just far and away the biggest issue. Okay. It's like it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. It's like going like this.
Sure.
I'm sorry, you can't see that on a podcast, but the lines are diverging.
They're going the opposite direction.
They're going the wrong way. Yeah. One thing I personally am interested in is I really hope that our community becomes more inclusive to people of different backgrounds, and I still think there is hesitancy around that, and I think we will evolve because our, the population of the United States as a whole looks different than Eau Claire, and it's going to everybody's going to kind of mix together, and I think that will be a learning curve for residents, and I really feel like our residents, and our leaders are care a lot about people and their community, and I know they will succeed at going through that transition, but I do see that as a work that on our to-do list as a community for every single person to try to grapple with, and it's going to look different for different people, but I think that's on my own personal wish list.
Okay. Scott, any final thoughts that you have?
Maybe another question would be, because we do try to tie this back to business, and so I guess 2 things. One is how does the work that the city of Eau Claire affect our business climate, and then for business people who really want to have input into these things and want to pass along their priorities for what the city might do with its budget and with its priorities, what kind of is your advice to our investors who are listening to this today?
So in terms of how it relates to business, what we do, of course, we do all of the the core functions, so police and fire and parks and streets and transit, and I think it's sort of generally, and we do have things that are specific to businesses, like we have 5 different small loan programs. I think we have more than $1 million out. As mentioned, we do economic development, that kind of thing. As you know, we have been working with DECI to try to figure out how they can have more autonomy and kind of more entrepreneurial focus. So they work on the downtown, but we also invest a ton in our downtown. We're thinking about housing policy. So there's ways that it intersects with the business community. But I think in general, if the city of Eau Claire is functioning well, it helps businesses. Certainly for retail or restaurants, it helps to have more residents who have money, and then they go out and spend it in those. And in terms of how people can be involved, I do think that the Chamber of Commerce is perhaps the most organized advocacy and social and networking group of all the different stakeholders groups. So I think you guys are doing really well with that, and you guys are kind of geniuses in a respectful and collegial way, like connecting and both giving and learning and asking about stuff. So I really think they have a great champion with you all, and things like the bus trip to Madison, which I gotta say is such an exhausting day. That's like interesting strategy to get us all to sit on a bus for 8 hours. And then pair people up.
It is, but if we don't do it, guess what happens?
Yeah, no, but I'm telling you, you do a great job of intermingling the leadership Eau Claire. How cool is that? You're basically putting all these people together. They look at all different aspects of the community, including the city and the county, and then they have to do a project together. I'm telling you, you could write the book.
Well, I think we have in some ways, haven't we, Scott? But again, not to divert too far, but I do tell people I've learned some key things when it comes to politics from a dear friend called Governor Tommy Thompson.
Yeah.
And he once told me that if you're not at the table when it comes to politics, you're on the table. Yeah. And so I think when people ask why we do that, it's if we don't show up, we're in trouble. So, but I think, again, the platform Scott and our interns have built over the years really shows that everybody is important to bring to that.
Yeah.
And so, but
just how people can get involved too. I do think being agreeing, volunteering to be on committees and stuff like that, you really do get to learn about the city and also insert your opinion.
Yep. So any final thoughts on, and again, I'm the one who always steers us left, but coming back to the budget, any things you want to share or make sure people understand, or any general thoughts you want to leave us with? I feel hopeful about Eau Claire.
And I'm so proud of our employees and our community as a whole that we have been able to kind of find a path to continue to have just a fantastic place to live, even though it has been so challenging financially, and also to queue up some really big efforts that we don't know if if any of them will work out, but hopefully, we're really hope for a premier resort area tax, which is basically an optional sales tax. There's some other major projects. Some of them are controversial, but they're ones that we think will, if we can move forward with them, or even some of them, that'll put us on financial footing. So I'm pleased. I'm proud of what we've done so far, and I'm proud that we are going to continue to work at it and just use our brains and hearts to maneuver through. And so, just a lot of gratitude for our whole community and all the different partners, and especially the staff who have been struggling with this, and the council as well.
All right. Scott, any final words you want to give our audience before we say goodnight?
No, thanks, Stephanie, for joining us today. And you made an allusion to it, so maybe I will give a pitch, because you mentioned boards and committees and so forth. And I think a lot of people don't realize that you can get involved in some key areas in the city without having to go out and run for office.
Correct.
So if you go to the city website, there's something called a resource bank. And if you have a particular area of expertise, or you see an area whether it's housing or sustainability or other things, that there may be a city board or commission which you could apply to be on. And that's something that we would encourage business
Very
people
much.
to do because they can contribute quite a bit.
But just on that, too, believe it or not, we have just wrapped up the federal election, but we are just kicking off the local election. I know the Chamber's already talked about that, but we have our at-large positions open. Starting December 1st, you can pull papers, and it's fantastic to have a diverse set of voices on the council, and everybody brings their own perspective, so people can be thinking about that as well.
And I would just both ways. I echo both. What I would with what Scott talked about is it's a good way for somebody who wants to understand what is city government to serve on a committee or a commission and start to see what that all means and how it works to, boy, do I want to put my life out there and run for a political office? You have a better understanding.
Yep.
So if you want to put your toes in the water, that's certainly a way. And again, from the city standpoint, they're no different than anybody else when it comes to, they want that input. They need people to have it.
Yep.
So I would just really encourage people to take a look at that list and where could you give of some time and learn better what our city does. So Stephanie, on behalf of the Chamber, thank you. Appreciate it. Love having you here and talking about all the wonderful things that are going on. And I'll leave this to Chelsea to wrap up in a beautiful way with a bow and a picture and the whole thing. And we'll be back soon with our next episode. But as always, if you have a topic you would like us to cover in Talking Point, please let Scott or I or Chelsea know, and we'll see if we can put it together. So with that, folks, have a wonderful time.
Thank you, Dave. And as I wrap up here, just want to give another quick shout out to our media sponsor, Royal Credit Union. And thank you to our audience for tuning in today. We'll catch you in the next one.